She calmed 3 4-year-old triplets who had made 27 professional nannies quit in 8 months, and all she did was bake them pancakes using a recipe from a dead woman who once loved her. But let this story start from the beginning. From the night Cassandra Morgan woke up shivering in a broken-down car behind a grocery store, her 5-year-old daughter gasping for air through an asthma attack, with no money for medicine and nowhere left to go. From the morning she walked into a luxury Manhattan penthouse and witnessed World War III erupting in a living room, worth more than she would earn in 10 lifetimes. From the moment she applied to be a housekeeper for a man she would later discover was the most feared mafia boss in New York. From the day she accidentally became a mother to 3 wild boys who did not need discipline or control. They just needed someone to see them as children instead of problems to be solved. Her name is Cassandra Morgan. She is 28 years old. She is an orphan who aged out of the foster system with nothing. She is a survivor of 4 years of abuse who still carries the scars on her back. She is a single mother drowning in medical debt and desperation, and she is about to walk into a penthouse that will change everything. All because she knows how to make really good pancakes. If you want to see how a homeless single mom tamed the untamable and melted the heart of a ruthless mafia boss, smash that like button and subscribe to this channel. Share this story with someone who believes in second chances. Because sometimes, the best love stories begin with breakfast. That night was the coldest night of November in New York. Cassandra Morgan huddled in the driver's seat of her 1994 Honda Civic, the car she had bought for $500 from a junkyard 3 years earlier. The heater had broken down since last winter and she hadn't had the money to fix it. She pulled the thin blanket tighter around Mia, who was sleeping in the back seat, trying to keep her daughter warm enough against the bone-cutting cold. The clock on her phone read 2:43 in the morning. The battery was down to 12%. Cassie didn't dare turn on the lights or warm the car by starting the engine because the gas left in the tank was only enough for one short trip. She looked through the fogged-up window as the weak yellow glow from a Walmart sign spilled into the car, casting ghost-like shadows that danced across the cracked ceiling. This was the 5th night they had slept in the car since being evicted from their apartment. The landlord had run out of patience with 3 months of unpaid rent. Cassie still remembered the look of contempt in his eyes as he threw their bags into the hallway. She didn't cry. She had forgotten how to cry a long time ago. Mia's breathing began to turn wheezy. Cassie spun around instantly, her heart tightening as she realized her daughter was awake, her wide eyes open in the darkness, lips turning blue, chest heaving as she struggled to breathe. An asthma attack. Cassie lunged for her bag, tearing through everything to find the inhaler. When she found it, she shook it hard and pressed it to Mia's mouth. Nothing. The inhaler had run out 2 days earlier. She had tried to ration it, using only 1 puff instead of 2 each time, hoping to stretch it for a few more days until she could afford a new one. But now there was nothing left. "Mommy, I can't breathe." Mia's voice was weak and hoarse, each word forcing its way out as if her throat was being squeezed shut. Cassie pulled her close, rubbing Mia's back in slow circles the way Eleanor had taught her when she was a child in foster care. "Slow breaths, baby. Breathe in slowly. Breathe out slowly. Mommy's here. Mommy's here." She whispered the words while her mind raced. The hospital would treat Mia in an emergency, but afterward would come a bill in the thousands of dollars she couldn't pay. Her medical debt was already over $15,000 from previous visits. But if she didn't take Mia right now, her daughter could. She couldn't let herself finish the thought. Cassie started the car and drove toward the nearest hospital, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. 15 minutes later, Mia lay in the emergency room with an oxygen mask over her face, her breathing slowly evening out. Cassie sat beside her, gripping her daughter's tiny hand as a nurse handed her a stack of papers to sign. Another debt added to the mountain she already carried. She signed without reading. Money could be owed. Her daughter couldn't be lost. At 4 in the morning, after Mia had fallen asleep in the hospital room, Cassie sat on a hard plastic chair and pulled out her phone with 3% battery left. She opened a job search app, her fingers scrolling through listings in quiet desperation. Waitress, low pay, night shifts, cashier, part-time, not enough to live on, cleaning work, temporary, unstable. Then she stopped at a listing that felt completely different. Live-in housekeeper needed, high pay, experience with children required. The address was in Upper East Side, Manhattan. The salary made Cassie read it twice, convinced she had misread it. 5 times more than what she earned from 4 jobs combined. Too good to be true. There had to be something wrong, but Cassie was out of options. Her daughter was in the hospital because she couldn't afford medicine. They were living in a car in the middle of a New York winter. She had nothing left to lose. Cassie pressed apply just before the phone died completely. She didn't know that single tap would lead her into the penthouse of one of the most dangerous men in the city, into the lives of 3 wild children no one had been able to control. and into a future that would change her life forever. The next morning, Cassie received the reply email while sitting in the hospital room waiting for Mia to be discharged. The interview had been scheduled for 6 in the morning the following day. 6 in the morning. Who interviews a housekeeper at 6 in the morning? But Cassie didn't have the right to question it. She only had the right to show up on time and pray this wasn't a scam. That night, she took Mia to Rosa's place, her former neighbor from the apartment complex before they were evicted. Rosa was a Puerto Rican woman in her 60s, living alone after her husband passed away and her grown children moved far away. She was the only one still willing to help Cassie when the rest of the world had turned its back. "She's still weak," Rosa said, looking at Mia with worried eyes. "Are you sure you have to go to an interview tomorrow morning?" "I don't have any other choice, ma'am." Cassie bent down and kissed Mia's sleeping forehead. "If I don't get this job, I don't know what else to do." Rosa sighed and placed a hand on Cassie's shoulder. "You're the strongest child I've ever known. I saw that back when you were still in foster care. You'll get through this." Cassie wasn't so sure, but she nodded and left. She worked her night cleaning shift from 10 in the evening until 4 in the morning at an office building, then went straight to the interview address without time to shower or change properly. She only managed to stop at a public restroom in the subway station, wipe herself down with wet paper towels, and change into the only decent outfit she had left. A white button-down shirt yellowed at the collar, and black slacks that fit a little too tight because she had lost too much weight over the past few months. Cassie pulled her sleeves down as far as she could to hide the scar on her wrist. She didn't want anyone to see the marks of her past. When she stepped out of the subway station in the Upper East Side, Cassie felt like she had landed on another planet. Towering buildings with gleaming glass facades, luxury cars lined along the street, each one worth more than her entire lifetime of work. Pedestrians in tailored suits and office dresses, Starbucks cups in hand, moving with purpose and importance. And her, Cassandra Morgan, standing in the middle of all that wealth with the faint scent of industrial bleach still clinging to her hair. The building she needed was one of the tallest in the area, with a marble lobby and crystal chandeliers hanging from a soaring ceiling. Cassie walked inside, trying to look as though she belonged there even as her heart pounded in her chest. The security guard at the desk looked up at her, his gaze sweeping from head to toe with undisguised disdain. "What are you here for?" His voice was cold. "I have an interview. At the penthouse." "An interview?" He smirked. "For what position?" "Housekeeper." He looked her over again, this time more carefully, as if appraising a cheap item in a second-hand shop. Cassie felt her cheeks burn with shame, but she lifted her chin. She had endured far worse than this. A look of contempt was nothing compared to what Ryan had done to her. "I'll call upstairs to confirm." He picked up the phone, spoke briefly, then hung up with a flicker of surprise on his face. Private elevator at the end of the hall on the right. Straight to the penthouse. Cassie stepped into the elevator, the polished metal doors sliding shut behind her. She looked at her reflection in the mirrored surface and barely recognized the woman staring back. Thin, pale, dark circles under her eyes from endless lack of sleep. But there was still a faint glimmer of hope left in her gaze. The elevator stopped, the doors opened, and Cassie stepped into a completely different world. The penthouse was vast, with ceilings over 4 meters high and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking all of Central Park. The furnishings were modern and minimalist, yet so expensive, Cassie didn't dare touch anything. The artwork on the walls looked like it belonged in a museum rather than a home. A middle-aged woman with neatly pinned salt and pepper hair and a severe black suit approached her. Her face was stern, but there was something like pity in her eyes when she looked at Cassie. "You're here to interview for the housekeeper position?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm Cassandra Morgan. I'm Margaret, the family's house manager." She looked Cassie up and down, but not with the guard's contempt. It was the look of someone assessing whether she could endure what lay ahead. "Do you have experience with children?" "I have a 5-year-old daughter," Cassie said. "Does that count?" "Possibly." Margaret stepped aside and motioned for Cassie to follow her. "This way." "I need to warn you first. Mr. Moretti has 3 4-year-old triplet sons. They're quite—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Energetic. We've had 27 nannies in the past 8 months. None of them lasted more than 48 hours. Cassie stopped walking. 27 nannies? In 8 months? The most recent one lasted only 4 hours before running out of the building and swearing she'd never come back. Margaret said it calmly, as if she were reporting the weather. The original listing was for a housekeeper, but honestly, we need someone who can handle the boys. If you can do both, the salary will be doubled. Doubled. That number meant Cassie could quit all 4 of her current jobs. It meant she could actually be there for Mia. It meant she could stop drowning. But 27 nannies. She should run right now. "I can try," Cassie heard herself say. That was when the screaming began echoing from deeper inside the apartment. That screaming wasn't the sound of fear or a cry for help. It was a battle cry, the roar of tiny warriors declaring their territory. Margaret let out a weary sigh, as if this was something she endured every single day, and hurried toward the living room. Cassie followed, and the moment she crossed the doorway, she understood exactly why 27 nannies had run away. The vast living room with its expensive furnishings had turned into a war zone. Cereal was scattered across the marble floor, like a layer of brown and yellow snow. Milk pooled in uneven white patches on a Persian rug. Cassie was certain was worth more than an entire year of her old rent. A piece of artwork on the wall had been scribbled over with crayons. Wild lines slashed across the face of a lady in the painting. And in the middle of all that chaos were 3 identical boys, from their curly black hair to their big brown eyes. Yet each of them was creating a different kind of destruction. The first boy stood on top of the marble kitchen island, tilting a cereal box and pouring it onto the floor with a defiant expression. He stared straight at Margaret, lips pressed tight as if to say she couldn't do a thing to him. "That's Nico," Margaret shouted to Cassie over the noise. "The oldest of the 3x4 minutes. He thinks he's the boss." Cassie looked toward the corner of the room, and her heart nearly stopped. The second boy was hanging from the massive curtains, at least 3 meters above the ground, swinging like a monkey in a zoo. The red velvet fabric trembled dangerously, and Cassie could see the curtain rod beginning to bend under the boy's weight. "Leo," Margaret explained, as if a 4-year-old dangling 3 meters in the air was perfectly normal. "The middle one. He can climb anything. We've had to lock all the windows because we're afraid he'll climb out onto the balcony." A deafening clanging sound erupted from the kitchen, making Cassie turn around. The third boy, the smallest of the 3, sat in the middle of a pile of pots and pans, banging 2 saucepans together like a drummer. The shrill noise echoed through the penthouse, and the boy screamed along with each strike at a volume Cassie didn't think a 4-year-old could produce. "And that's Theo," Margaret nearly had to yell into Cassie's ear. "The youngest, the quietest, but when he wants attention, the whole building knows it. Boys, stop right now." Margaret tried to use a firm voice. "Stop immediately." No one listened. Nico kept pouring cereal. Leo swung harder on the curtains. Theo banged the pots louder. The 3 boys completely ignored Margaret's existence, as if she were an invisible ghost. "We've tried everything." Margaret turned to Cassie with a look of surrender. "Strict nannies, gentle nannies, nannies with degrees in child psychology, nannies who worked with autistic children, nannies from Europe, Asia, South America. No one can control them. Either they drive people insane or they make them cry and run away. Mr. Moretti is almost desperate. He's in his office trying to work while this is what every morning looks like." Cassie stood still and watched. She didn't see 3 bad children. She didn't see 3 little monsters that needed to be controlled. She saw something else. She saw Nico, whose eyes weren't defiant but testing, waiting to see how the adult would react, checking whether anyone truly cared or just wanted him to be quiet. She saw Leo up high, not because he wanted to destroy anything, but because he wanted to be seen, wanted someone to notice him long enough to worry. She saw Theo banging the pots not because he loved noise, but because noise was the only way he knew how to say that he existed, that he was here, that someone should look at him. Cassie saw herself in those boys. The orphan child who screamed and broke things in foster care because no one listened. The child who was called trouble, a problem, someone no one wanted to adopt. Until Eleanor came along and looked past the anger to see the child inside who was starving for love. "Have you asked them what they want?" Cassie suddenly spoke. Margaret turned to her as if she had just spoken in a foreign language. "What did you say?" "They're screaming and destroying things because something's wrong," Cassie said. "Have you asked them what they want?" "They don't know what they want. They're only 4 years old. They know exactly what they want," Cassie replied, her eyes still on the boys. "They just don't know how to say it yet." Before Margaret could object, Cassie stepped straight into the kitchen, flooded with cereal. She didn't shout. She didn't give orders. She simply walked up to Nico, who was still standing on the island with the cereal box in his hands, and sat down so her eyes were level with his. Nico froze, surprised. This wasn't the reaction he expected. Every adult before had yelled, had snatched the cereal away, had told him he was bad, but this woman just looked at him calmly and asked a question no one had ever asked him before. "You're hungry, aren't you?" Cassie's voice was gentle. "You poured the cereal because no one made breakfast for you, right?" Nico blinked. The 4-year-old boy with the big brown eyes stared at her like she had read his thoughts. The cereal box lowered in his hands. "I'm hungry," he said, his voice much smaller than the screaming before. "Yesterday's nanny left before making breakfast." The clanging stopped. Cassie turned and saw Theo watching her. the pot still in his hands but no longer banging them. Up high, Leo stopped swinging on the curtains and stared down, curious about the strange woman talking to his older brother. "Who are you?" Leo asked from above. "I'm Cassie," she replied, looking up at him. "And you need to come down from there before you fall." "I won't fall," Leo said proudly. "I'm really good at climbing. I believe you're good at climbing. But I'm about to make breakfast and I need helpers. Do you want to help?" Leo tilted his head, thinking, "What are you making? What do you want to eat?" Cassie asked, looking at all three boys. "Pancakes." Theo suddenly spoke, the first full word he had said since Cassie walked in. "I want pancakes." "I can make pancakes," Cassie smiled. "But I need 3 assistant chefs. Do you want to be chefs?" The 3 boys looked at each other, communicating silently in a way only triplets could. Then, as if an agreement had been reached, Nico put the cereal box down and climbed off the island. Leo released the curtain and instead of jumping, climbed down slowly with impressive skill. Theo placed the pots on the floor and stood up. All 3 boys walked to the counter and lined up, staring at Cassie with anticipation. Margaret stood frozen in the doorway, mouth open, unable to speak. Cassie began searching for ingredients in the luxurious kitchen filled with modern appliances she had never seen before. "Where's the flour?" she asked aloud. "Left cabinet," Nico pointed. "And the eggs?" "The big fridge," Leo said. "The milk's there too. I know because I sneak milk at night. Good job." Cassie laid the ingredients out on the counter. "Now everyone gets a job. Nico, you're the oldest. You'll measure the flour. Leo, you crack the eggs. Theo, you stir the batter, okay?" All 3 nodded, their eyes lighting up with a kind of excitement Cassie suspected no one had seen in them for a long time. Cassie guided Nico as he poured flour into the bowl, most of it landing where it should, only a little spilling out. She didn't scold him, just laughed and said flour liked to dance. Leo cracked the eggs with fierce concentration, tongue sticking out to the side, and only broke one onto the floor. When he looked ready to cry, thinking he'd be yelled at, Cassie handed him another egg and said even the best chefs broke eggs sometimes. Theo stirred the batter with such focus he didn't say a word, fully absorbed in his task. When Cassie poured the batter onto the pan, a familiar smell filled the kitchen. It was Eleanor's recipe, the only foster mother who had ever loved her during her years in care. Eleanor had passed away 3 years earlier, just before Mia was born, but her pancake recipe lived on in Cassie's memory. A little vanilla, a little brown sugar, and the secret was a small pinch of cinnamon. Eleanor used to say pancakes weren't just food, they were love you could taste. "Who wants to flip one?" Cassie asked. Me. 3 voices answered at once. Cassie helped each boy flip a pancake, holding the pan handle together with their small hands. Nico flipped his perfectly and cheered. Leo flipped a bit too hard and nearly sent it flying, but it landed safely back in the pan. And Theo, the quietest one, flipped his so perfectly Cassie had to call him a flipping genius. Theo's smile then, small but real, was the first true smile Cassie had seen on his face. 30 minutes later, the kitchen looked like a flour bomb had gone off. Batter was on the floor, the counters, the boys' hair, and Cassie's too. But on the table was a towering stack of pancakes, and 3 boys sat eating happily from plates they had helped make themselves. No more screaming, no more banging pots, no one hanging from the curtains, just chewing, quiet giggles, and Nico telling his brothers these were the best pancakes ever. "This is the best breakfast I've ever had," Leo declared, his mouth still full. "Because you made it yourselves," Cassie said, wiping flour from Theo's cheek. "Food always tastes better when you make it." "Will you make breakfast with us tomorrow?" Theo asked softly, his voice trembling as if afraid of the answer. "If your dad lets me stay, I'll make breakfast with you every day." "Dad will let you stay," Nico said firmly. "All the nannies leave, but you're different. You don't yell." Margaret was still standing in the doorway, now with tears in her eyes. In 8 months, she had never seen the boys sit and eat a full meal, never seen them laugh like this, never seen Theo, the quietest one, speak so much. "How did you do that?" Margaret asked, her voice rough with emotion. Cassie looked at the boys eating happily, then turned back to her. "I didn't see 3 bad children. I just saw 3 hungry children who were treated like problems instead of people. Sometimes all kids need is someone who listens." That was when a voice spoke from behind her, deep and cold as ice. "Who are you?" Cassie turned around and nearly dropped the pan in her hands. The man standing in the kitchen doorway was the embodiment of power and danger. He stood at least 6'1", with broad shoulders and solid muscle visible beneath the thin fabric of a black shirt left casually unbuttoned at the top. Tattoos ran from his neck down across his chest, Intricate patterns Cassie didn't have time to fully see, but more than enough to know he wasn't an ordinary man. A thick gold chain rested against his chest, catching the kitchen light. His face looked carved from stone, sharp jawline, straight nose, and eyes so dark and cold Cassie felt frozen where she stood. His black hair was slightly disheveled, as if he had run his hands through it too many times from stress. This was the face of a man who wasn't used to being refused, wasn't used to being challenged, and certainly wasn't used to seeing his 3 sons sitting calmly and eating breakfast like this. "Dad." Nico looked up, his mouth still smeared with syrup. "You have to try these pancakes. They're really good. Miss Cassie made them with us." Lorenzo Moretti, the boss of one of the most powerful mafia families in New York, stood perfectly still. His cold eyes moved from Nico to Leo and then to Theo, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. 3 sons, the children who had driven 27 nannies away, were sitting properly at the table, eating pancakes and talking like ordinary kids. "I cracked the eggs," Leo bragged proudly. "I only broke one. I stirred the batter," Theo added, and it was the longest sentence he had spoken all morning. "Miss Cassie says I'm a flipping genius." Lorenzo turned his gaze to Cassie, and she felt as if she were being scanned to the bone. His stare was sharp, calculating, assessing every detail of who she was in a few silent seconds. "You're here for the housekeeper position," he said at last. Not a question, but a statement. "Yes." Cassie forced her voice to stay steady even as her heart raced. "I'm Cassandra Morgan. I came for the interview this morning. And you decided to cook breakfast instead of interviewing. The boys were hungry and destroying the kitchen," Cassie replied. Surprised, her voice didn't shake. "I thought breakfast would solve both problems." Lorenzo was silent for a long moment. He looked at the stack of pancakes on the table, at the kitchen smeared with flour and eggs, at his 3 sons eating happily with syrup on their cheeks and flour in their hair. Then he looked back at Cassie and something shifted in those cold eyes. Not warmth, but recognition, respect. 27 professional nannies couldn't get my sons to sit and eat a single meal in the past 8 months. Lorenzo's voice was still deep but no longer icy. "You've been here less than an hour and they're eating pancakes like angels. What did you do?" "I asked them what they wanted," Cassie answered simply. "Then I listened." Lorenzo looked at her as if she had spoken in a language he had never heard before. "You're hired," he said abruptly. What?" "You're hired," Lorenzo repeated. "Not as a housekeeper. As whatever it is you just did. Triple the salary listed. Starting today." Cassie opened her mouth to speak, but Lorenzo had already turned to Margaret. "Prepare a room for her, close to my son's rooms, and call my lawyer. I want an employment contract drafted before noon." "Mr. Moretti." Cassie spoke. Surprised, she dared interrupt him. "I have one condition." Lorenzo stopped and turned, one eyebrow lifting slightly. Few people dared set conditions with him and live to tell about it. "What condition?" "I have a daughter," Cassie said, her voice trembling but firm. "Mia, 5 years old. If this is a live-in position, she has to stay with me. I can't be apart from her." Lorenzo didn't answer right away. He studied Cassie with an unreadable expression, and she felt like she was standing in a courtroom awaiting judgment. Every second stretched endlessly. "How old is she?" 5. "And you're raising her alone?" "Yes." Cassie didn't explain further. She didn't want to talk about Ryan, about the years of hell, about why she was alone. Lorenzo nodded once. "Bring the girl here. There's more than enough room. My sons could use a sister to play with. We're getting a sister." Leo jumped up from his chair, eyes shining. "Really? A real sister?" "Her name is Mia," Cassie said. Tears threatening as relief washed over her. "She's 5, 1 year older than you." "We'll protect her," Nico declared seriously. "We're big brothers. Big brothers protect their sister." Lorenzo looked at his sons, then at Cassie, and she could swear the corner of his mouth lifted just slightly. "Any other conditions?" "My daughter has asthma," Cassie added, knowing she was pushing her luck but unable to stop. "She needs monthly medication, and I have a lot of medical debt. I'll take care of the best health insurance for both of you." Lorenzo cut in. "Medication? Doctors? Anything the girl needs? You just take care of my sons." Cassie didn't know what to say. That morning she had been sleeping in a car with her asthmatic daughter, unsure where the next meal would come from. Now a mafia boss was offering her a salary 10 times anything she had ever earned, along with housing and health care. "Is this real? When can you start?" Lorenzo asked. I need to pick up my daughter," Cassie stammered. "She's staying with someone I know. I can come back this afternoon." "I'll send a car," Lorenzo said, pulling out his phone. "The address." Cassie recited Rosa's address as if in a dream. Everything was happening too fast, too unreal. She had come here hoping only for a job to survive. She never imagined she would leave with a completely new life. "Dad," Theo suddenly spoke, his small voice quiet. "Miss Cassie is staying with us." "Right. She's not leaving like the others." Lorenzo looked at his son, then at Cassie with a warning in his eyes that said if she dared hurt his children, she would regret it. But Cassie wasn't afraid of that look. She had lived in fear of another man for 4 years, and she knew the difference between real danger and protection. Lorenzo Moretti was dangerous, but not to those who belonged to him. "She's staying," Lorenzo told Theo, his eyes still on Cassie. "Right, Miss Morgan." Cassie looked at the 3 boys, watching her with hopeful eyes. 3 children she had met less than an hour ago, yet who reminded her of herself as a child. 3 children who needed someone to stay. "Yes," she said, "I'll stay." The black Mercedes pulled to a stop in front of the aging apartment building in Queens where Rosa lived. Cassie stepped out of the car, feeling like she had slipped into someone else's dream. Just a few hours earlier, she had been a homeless woman interviewing for a housekeeper job. Now she had ridden in a luxury car with a private driver, on her way to pick up her daughter and take her to a new home. Rosa opened the door with Mia hiding behind her, the little girl's wide eyes fixed anxiously on the expensive car. "Mommy, what's happening?" Mia whispered, her voice barely louder than a breath. "Are we in trouble?" "No, sweetheart." Cassie knelt down and wrapped her arms around her daughter. "Mommy found a job, a good job, and we're going to have a place to live. A real home, a real home." Mia blinked, not sleeping in the car anymore. "Never again." Cassie kissed her forehead, fighting back tears. "Never again, I promise." Rosa watched them with tears in her eyes. She handed Cassie a small bag holding the few belongings Mia had and squeezed her hand tightly. "You deserve happiness, child. Both of you do." On the drive back to Manhattan, Mia sat pressed close to Cassie, her tiny hand gripping her mother's and never letting go. She stayed quiet, staring out the window as the city shifted from run-down streets to gleaming towers of glass and steel. "Mommy, what kind of job are you doing?" Mia finally asked. "I'm going to take care of 3 little boys," Cassie explained. "They're triplets, 4 years old, 1 year younger than you. You'll meet them." "Are they scary, Mommy?" Mia's voice trembled, and Cassie knew her daughter was thinking about shouting and banging and crying from the past. "No, sweetheart. They're a little noisy, but they're not scary, I promise." When the elevator opened onto the penthouse floor, Mia pressed herself against Cassie's leg, her eyes wide as she took in the luxurious apartment. She had never seen a place this big or this beautiful. The high walls, the enormous windows, the shiny objects she was afraid to touch. Then the sound of pounding footsteps filled the air. "The sister is here," Leo's voice shouted first, and the 3 boys appeared at the end of the hall like a small storm. But instead of charging forward as usual, they stopped when they saw Mia shrinking beside Cassie. The boys exchanged looks. Then Nico, as the oldest, stepped forward slowly. "You're Mia, right?" he asked, his voice much gentler than usual. "Miss Cassie said you're 5. You're 1 year older than us." Mia nodded shyly, still hiding behind her mother's leg. "You don't have to be scared," Nico said seriously. "We don't bite." Leo was more playful, but even he lowered his voice. "I'm really good at climbing. I can teach you if you want." And Theo, the quietest one, simply stood there watching Mia with kind eyes. He didn't say anything, but he reached into his pocket, pulled out a small piece of candy, and held it out to her, like a peace offering. Mia looked at the candy, then up at Cassie. When her mother nodded, she timidly reached out and took it. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice soft as wind chimes. It was the first thing she said to the boys, and it felt like it cracked an invisible layer of ice between them. "Do you like dolls?" Leo asked. "We don't have dolls, but we have dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are fun too. I have a T-Rex that roars. Do you want to see it?" Mia glanced at her mother again, and when Cassie smiled encouragingly, she finally stepped out from her hiding place. "Yes, I want to see." The boys seemed instantly energized. Leo ran off to grab the dinosaur. Nico started explaining their toy collection, and Theo quietly walked beside Mia like a tiny bodyguard. "We'll protect you." Nico suddenly stopped and said, his voice so serious it hardly fit a 4-year-old. "Miss Cassie is our mom now, so you're our sister. Big brothers protect their sister. That's the rule." "Yeah, it's the rule," Leo nodded firmly. "Anyone who picks on you, we'll show them." Mia looked at the 3 boys with tears pooling in her eyes, and Cassie realized her daughter was feeling something she had never truly known before. Belonging, safety. Mia had never had siblings, never had anyone stand on her side besides her mother. And now she had 3 brothers declaring they would protect her after knowing her for only minutes. "Thank you," Mia said, her voice shaking. "I've never had big brothers before." "Well, now you've got 3 at once," Leo grinned. "Saves time getting to know them one by one." Margaret appeared at the end of the hall, watching the 4 children slowly finding their way toward each other. She turned to Cassie, her eyes filled with undisguised amazement. "You really do have something magical with children." "It's not magic," Cassie replied, her eyes following the 4 kids as they walked together toward the playroom. "It's just love. Sometimes that's all children need." That afternoon, the storm arrived without any warning at all. 1 minute earlier, the 4 children had been playing happily in the playroom, laughter echoing through the penthouse. The next minute, everything exploded. Cassie didn't know exactly what triggered it. Maybe Leo grabbed the T-Rex dinosaur out of Nico's hands. Maybe Theo was pushed when he tried to squeeze between his brothers. Maybe it was simply the exhaustion piling up from a long day filled with too many changes. Whatever the cause, the result was unmistakable. All 3 boys erupted at once like 3 timed bombs detonating together. Nico screamed and hurled toys at the wall with the shocking strength of a 4-year-old. Leo sobbed uncontrollably, pounding his fists against the floor while yelling words no one could understand. And Theo, the quietest of the 3, reacted the hardest of all. He dropped to the floor, wrapped his arms around his knees, crying without sound, while his entire body trembled as if he were carrying pain too big for words. Mia stood frozen in the corner of the room, eyes wide with terror, her small hands clamped tightly over her ears. She was used to yelling, too used to it. Memories of Ryan screaming, of the terrifying nights in their old apartment, rushed back and made her shake. Margaret rushed to the doorway of the playroom, her face drained of color. "This is when the nannies usually give up," she said to Cassie, her voice tight. "When all 3 of them melt down like this at the same time, no one can control it. Do you want me to call Mr. Moretti?" Cassie didn't answer her. She was watching the boys, listening to their cries, trying to understand what was really happening beneath this storm. She remembered herself as a child, the time she screamed and broke things in foster care, the time she was punished for losing control. No one understood that she wasn't bad. She was just hurting and didn't know how to say it, until Eleanor came. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't punished. She had simply sat beside Cassie and waited for the storm to pass. Cassie walked into the middle of the playroom, into the chaos of flying toys and raw crying, and sat down on the floor. She didn't shout. She didn't try to intervene. She didn't ask anyone to calm down. She just sat there, steady and present, like an island in the middle of the storm. Margaret opened her mouth to speak, but Cassie lifted a hand to signal silence. Mia, still trembling in the corner, looked at her mother with confusion and fear. But when she saw the calm on Cassie's face, she slowly left the corner and came to sit beside her. "What are you doing, Mommy?" Mia whispered, waiting for them to finish crying. Cassie answered softly, stroking her daughter's hair. "Sometimes people need to cry until the tears run out. Our job is just to be here when they do." The 2 of them sat there as the storm slowly weakened. Nico was the first to notice Cassie. He stopped throwing toys and stared at the woman sitting calmly in the middle of the mess he had created. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't leaving. She was just sitting there, waiting. It confused him so much that he forgot to stay angry. Leo stopped crying next, his sobs fading into sniffles when he realized no one was trying to force him to be quiet. No one told him boys weren't allowed to cry. No one ordered him to stop right now. He was allowed to cry, and somehow, that made him not want to anymore. Then there was Theo. He lifted his head, eyes red and soaked with tears, and looked at Cassie as if searching for something. What he found was calm, not anger, not disappointment, just calm and patience. Theo was the first to move toward her. He crawled across the floor littered with toys and climbed into her lap, curling up like a kitten seeking warmth. Cassie held him without saying a word. Then Nico came over and sat close beside her, resting his head against her shoulder. Then Leo, the most energetic one, squeezed into the pile of arms too, tears still wet on his cheeks. Mia, not wanting to be left out, wrapped her arms around her mother from behind. 5 people sat tangled together in the middle of the messy playroom, and no one spoke for a long time. "The other nannies used to yell when we cried," Nico finally said, his voice hoarse from crying so hard. "Then those nannies weren't very good," Cassie replied gently. "Everyone needs to cry sometimes. Yelling at someone who's sad only makes it worse." "You're not like them," Leo said, his nose still sniffly. "You didn't leave." "I didn't leave," Cassie confirmed. "I promised. Remember." Margaret stood in the doorway, gripping the doorframe as if she needed it to stay upright. She had worked for the Moretti family for 20 years. She had watched 27 nannies come and go. She had seen the best trained, most experienced professionals defeated by these 3 boys. But she had never seen this. Never seen someone simply sit down and wait. Never seen the boys choose to seek comfort on their own after a meltdown. Never seen them this peaceful. "How did you do it?" Margaret asked, her voice barely above a whisper, afraid to break the sacred quiet. Cassie looked up at her, one arm still wrapped around Theo, the other gently stroking Mia's hair. "I didn't do anything," she said. "I just stayed. Sometimes, being there is enough." Lorenzo came home earlier than usual that day. Margaret had called him right after the meltdown, not to report that the new nanny had quit, but to tell him what she had witnessed. He hadn't believed her. The previous 27 nannies had all said his sons were uncontrollable, that they needed harsher discipline, that perhaps they had psychological issues requiring treatment. And now Margaret was telling him that a woman who had simply sat on the floor and waited had caused all 3 boys to calm down on their own. He had to see it with his own eyes. When Lorenzo stepped into the living room, he stopped at the doorway as if he had hit an invisible wall. On the large sofa, Cassie was sitting with all 4 children gathered around her. Nico and Leo were on either side. Theo lay curled with his knees tucked up on her lap, and Mia sat pressed close to her mother. They were watching a cartoon about talking cars, soft giggles rising whenever something funny happened. These weren't the children who had driven 27 nannies away. These were normal children, happy, loved. "Dad." Leo was the first to spot him. "Dad, you're home. Come watch the movie with us." Lorenzo was about to refuse. He had work, calls to make, an empire to run. But then Theo lifted his head and looked at him with eyes still slightly red from crying, and the boy said a single word that dissolved every excuse. "Dad." Not a question, not a demand, just a quiet call filled with hope. Lorenzo walked over and sat down beside the sofa. He didn't know what to do, didn't know how to sit, stiff as a block of wood among the laughing children. But when Nico naturally leaned his head against Lorenzo's arm, when Leo started explaining the plot as if his father couldn't possibly understand it on his own, when Theo reached out and wrapped his fingers around Lorenzo's, something inside his chest softened. This was the first time in 8 months he had sat and watched a movie with his sons. That night, after all 4 children were fast asleep, Lorenzo found Cassie in the kitchen. She was making tea, her slender figure standing by the window, looking out over the Manhattan skyline at night. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her before he spoke. "How did you do it?" Cassie turned around, not surprised to see him. "Do what?" "Calm them down. Make them listen. Make Theo talk." He had barely spoken in 6 months. "I didn't make them do anything," Cassie replied, holding her cup of tea, her eyes meeting his. "I just listened. Children don't need someone to control them. They need someone to understand them." Lorenzo was quiet for a long time. He walked into the kitchen, poured himself a glass of whiskey, and sat across from Cassie at the island. "I don't know how to be a father," he admitted, his voice low and tired. "I can build an empire. I can control hundreds of men. I can negotiate multi-million-dollar deals. But with my own sons, I've failed completely. Their mother left when they were just over 1 year old," he continued, staring into his glass as if searching for answers there. "Victoria said she couldn't handle this life, couldn't handle the danger, couldn't handle me. She disappeared one night and never came back. Since then, I've tried to do it alone. I hired nannies. I hired specialists. I hired anyone who could help me raise my sons. But no one stayed. No one, until today." Cassie listened in silence, not interrupting, not judging. "You didn't fail," she finally said. "You're still here. You're still trying. You didn't leave like their mother did. That already counts for a lot, but it's not enough." Lorenzo looked up at her. "If it were enough, my sons wouldn't be the children 27 nannies couldn't stand. That's why I'm here," Cassie replied simply. "To help you find the rest." Lorenzo looked at the woman in front of him. Thin, pale, dark circles under her eyes, hands rough from years of labor, a single mother who had lived in a car with her sick child, a woman with nothing but love and patience. And somehow, she had done what his money and power never could. She had made his sons laugh. "Why did you take this job?" Lorenzo asked. "The real reason." Cassie looked straight into his eyes without flinching. "Because I was drowning, and you threw me a lifeline. But I stayed because of the children, because they look at me the way I used to look at myself in the mirror when I was young, angry on the outside, but inside just wanting to be loved." Lorenzo said nothing more. He only nodded, finished his whiskey, and stood up. But before leaving the kitchen, he stopped at the door. "Thank you," he said, his voice low and sincere. "For giving my sons something I didn't know how to give them." Then he walked away, leaving Cassie alone with her cold cup of tea and the feeling that her life had just turned in a completely new direction. 3 weeks passed like a beautiful dream. Cassie feared she might wake from it any moment. Life in the penthouse slowly became familiar. Every morning began with pancake breakfasts shared with 4 children. Every afternoon was filled with games, lessons, and small meltdowns handled with patience and love. Every evening ended with story time before bed. 4 small heads pressed together as Cassie read aloud. Mia had fully blended in with the Triplet brothers. She was no longer afraid of noise. She had even learned how to climb from Leo and how to roar like a dinosaur from Nico. And Theo, the quietest one, seemed to have claimed Mia as his true little sister, following her everywhere like a loyal puppy, always ready to protect her. Lorenzo changed too. He started coming home earlier, eating dinner with the family more often, even learning how to tell jokes, though his jokes usually left the children more confused than amused. Cassie found herself looking forward to those moments, looking forward to the way Lorenzo watched his children, looking forward to the rare smile that crossed his face when they did something sweet. She tried not to think too much about what that feeling meant. Then on Tuesday afternoon of the 3rd week, everything changed. Cassie was in the kitchen preparing an afternoon snack when the doorbell rang urgently. Before Margaret could reach the door, it burst open, and a man stumbled inside. Cassie froze in place. The man was covered in blood. Blood on his face, blood soaking his white shirt, blood running from a wound in his shoulder. He leaned against the wall to stay upright, panic in his eyes as he scanned the room until he saw Margaret. "Don Moretti," he rasped. "I need to see Don Moretti now. They're coming. Kozlov knows. They know our location." Margaret didn't panic the way Cassie expected. Instead, she moved with the frightening calm of someone accustomed to situations like this. She quickly helped the man into Lorenzo's office and shut the door. Cassie stood there, her heart pounding wildly, trying to process what had just happened. Don Moretti. That was what people called Italian mafia bosses. She had read enough books and seen enough movies to know that. Lorenzo Moretti, Don Moretti, the Moretti boss. All the pieces began to fall into place. The excessively luxurious penthouse, the guards she had seen moving through the building, the way people looked at Lorenzo with a mix of fear and respect. The phone calls in Italian he often took behind closed doors. She was living in the home of a mafia boss. She was raising the children of a mafia boss. Lorenzo appeared from his office a few minutes later, his face cold as stone. He gave Margaret orders in Italian, and when he turned back, he saw Cassie standing in the kitchen doorway, pale as ash. Their eyes met. Lorenzo understood instantly that she had seen everything, heard everything, understood everything. "Where are the children?" he asked tightly. "In the playroom with Mia. They didn't see anything." "Good." Lorenzo nodded. "Come into my office. We need to talk." Cassie followed him inside, where the bloodied man had already been taken away. Only a smear of blood on the floor remained as someone quietly cleaned it up. Lorenzo closed the door and turned to face her, his dark eyes unwavering. "You know now," he said. "Not a question." "You're Mafia," Cassie replied, her voice steadier than she expected. "A Mafia boss, Don Moretti." "Yes." Lorenzo didn't deny it. "The Moretti family is one of the most powerful families in New York. I'm the one in charge. Does that scare you?" Cassie was quiet for a moment, considering the question. It should have scared her. Any normal person would have been terrified. But Cassie had lived 4 years with a man who made her afraid every single day. And that man hadn't been Mafia. He had just been an ordinary man with fists and uncontrolled rage. "It should scare me," she finally said. "But honestly, I was far more afraid working night shifts in bad neighborhoods for minimum wage. I was far more afraid living with my ex-husband." Lorenzo frowned, clearly not expecting that answer. "You're not worried about living in the house of a criminal. Dangerous to whom?" Cassie asked calmly. "To the people who threaten you, the people who betray you, your enemies. But to your children, you're just a father doing his best. To me, you're the man who gave my daughter and me a home when no one else even looked at us. Your danger isn't aimed at us. So what exactly should I be afraid of?" Lorenzo looked at her as if she were a creature he had never encountered before. "Most people run when they find out." "I'm not most people," Cassie replied. "And I promised your children I would stay. I don't break promises to kids." Lorenzo was silent for a long moment, his dark eyes fixed on her with something Cassie couldn't read. Then he nodded slowly, as if making an important decision. "You're a remarkable woman, Cassandra Morgan," he said, his voice low and sincere. "I'm starting to understand why my sons care for you so deeply." Then he opened the door and gestured for her to go first. Now go check on the children. I have some matters to handle." Cassie stepped out, knowing that her relationship with Lorenzo had just turned a new page. She had seen his darkness and didn't run. And somehow, that made her feel closer to him than ever before. That night, after the children had fallen fast asleep, Cassie sat alone on the penthouse balcony, looking out at the city of New York glowing with lights below. She couldn't sleep. The events of the day kept looping through her mind. The blood-covered man, the conversation with Lorenzo, the realization that she was living inside the world of the Mafia, and yet, strangely, she wasn't afraid. She had lived with fear for far too long, and that fear had never come from crime bosses or killers. It had come from an ordinary man she had once called her husband. Soft footsteps sounded behind her, and Cassie knew it was Lorenzo before she turned around. "Can't sleep?" he asked, stepping onto the balcony and standing beside her. "No," she replied. "Too much to think about." Lorenzo was quiet for a moment, standing with her as they looked out over the city. Then he spoke, his voice low and softer than usual. "This morning you said you were more afraid of your ex-husband than of me. What did he do to you?" Cassie felt her body tense. It was a question she had avoided for 2 years. A question she didn't want to answer, because answering meant remembering, reliving memories she had tried to bury. But there was something about Lorenzo, about the way he asked not out of curiosity but out of a genuine need to understand, that made her open up. "His name was Ryan," Cassie began, her voice quiet and distant as if she were talking about someone else. "We met when I was 19, just out of the foster care system with nothing but a bag of old clothes. He was 5 years older, handsome, charming, and he said exactly what I wanted to hear. I thought it was love. I didn't know it was a trap." She paused and took a slow breath. Lorenzo didn't rush her. He simply waited in silence. "At first it was just words. He told me I was stupid, useless, that no one would ever love an orphan like me except him. I believed it because I didn't know anything else. Then words became punches. Punches became kicks. Kicks became 4 years of hell. I didn't know how to escape." Cassie gently pulled down the collar of her shirt, revealing a long scar running from her shoulder down her back. Lorenzo inhaled sharply when he saw it, his dark eyes clouding with something dangerous. "He shoved me into a glass door," Cassie said, her voice flat as if she were talking about the weather. "The glass shattered. I stitched the wound myself because he wouldn't let me go to a hospital, afraid they would ask questions. Mia was only 2 then, crying all night because she saw the blood. Where is he now?" Lorenzo's voice was low and cold, colder than anything Cassie had ever heard from him. This wasn't the voice of a father or an ordinary man. This was the voice of Don Moretti, of someone who could make people disappear without a trace. "I don't know," Cassie answered. 2 years ago, he drained our joint account and vanished. No words, no message. He just wasn't there anymore. And I wasn't sad or angry. I was just relieved that he was finally gone. "If he comes back," Lorenzo said, each word heavy as stone, "if he shows up anywhere near you or Mia, you tell me immediately. Do you understand?" Cassie looked at him and saw deadly seriousness in those eyes. "For what?" she asked. "To make sure he never has the chance to hurt you again," Lorenzo replied, without further explanation. And he didn't need to explain. Cassie understood exactly what he meant. "You don't have to do that," she said quietly. "I'm just the help." "You're not just the help." Lorenzo turned to her, and in the dim city light Cassie saw something in his eyes she didn't dare name. "You're the woman who brought joy back into my sons' lives. You're the first one who stayed. You belong to this family now, and I protect what belongs to me. At any cost." Cassie felt tears rise, not from sadness, but because for the first time in her life, someone wanted to protect her. Not because she was weak or needed saving, but because she mattered. "Thank you," she whispered. Lorenzo didn't answer with words. He only reached out, his fingers brushing lightly over the scar on her shoulder with a gentleness Cassie never imagined a man like him could possess. Then he withdrew his hand, turned, and walked back inside, leaving Cassie with a racing heart and the realization that she was falling in love with a Mafia boss. The 5th week marked a turning point Cassie never saw coming. It all began on an ordinary Tuesday morning like any other, with pancake batter sizzling in the pan and 4 children sitting around the table waiting. Leo was the first to say it. "Mama Cassie, I want extra chocolate chips." Cassie nearly dropped the pan. She turned to look at him, unsure if she had heard him correctly, but Leo only looked back at her with wide, innocent eyes, as if he had said the most natural thing in the world. "What did you just call me?" "Mama Cassie." Leo tilted his head. "You're our mama. You take care of us. You make breakfast for us. You read stories to us. You hold us when we cry. That's what mamas do. Nico nodded in agreement. We already talked about it, he said with the serious air of a leader who had made an important decision. Your mama Cassie. Dad is Papa Lorenzo. Mia is our sister. We're a family. And Theo, the quietest one, only looked at Cassie with hopeful eyes and asked a single question. Do you want to be our mama? Cassie couldn't hold back her tears. She knelt down, wrapped all 3 boys in her arms, and cried like she never had before. Yes, she wanted to. She wanted to more than anything. Lorenzo stood in the kitchen doorway, having witnessed everything. When Cassie looked up at him with anxious eyes, afraid she had crossed some invisible line, he only nodded slowly. A small, rare smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. And from that day on, Mama Cassie became what the 3 boys called her. Mia began calling Lorenzo Papa Lorenzo as well. At first shyly, then as naturally as breathing. She even drew a family picture with 7 people, the 6 of them now, and 1 future baby, because every family needed another baby. Lorenzo kept that drawing in his wallet. As Mia's 6th birthday approached, Cassie began planning a small celebration. She planned to bake a cake, blow up balloons, invite Rosa over. That was all she could think of, because that was all she had ever known how to do. But Lorenzo had other plans. I rented out the Children's Museum for Mia's birthday, he announced as casually as if he were ordering pizza. You did what? Cassie nearly choked on her coffee. The entire museum. 3 hours. No one else but our family. I also invited a few kids from the Triplets preschool. There will be costumed performers, a magician, and a castle-shaped birthday cake, because Mia once said she liked castles. Lorenzo, that's too much. Cassie tried to protest. I can't let you spend that much money on my daughter. Lorenzo cut in, and the way he said my daughter made Cassie's chest tighten. Mia is my daughter now, in every way that matters. She's had 5 birthdays with store-bought cakes and no parties because her mother had to work 3 or 4 jobs at once. This year she'll have the birthday she deserves. Don't argue with me about this, Cassie. This is what I want to do. Cassie couldn't argue, and she didn't want to when she saw the look in Lorenzo's eyes. The look of a father who wanted to give his daughter the entire world. On Mia's birthday, when the family walked into the empty museum reserved just for them, Mia froze at the entrance. She looked around with eyes so wide Cassie was afraid they might spill over. Balloons everywhere. Birthday banners hanging from the ceiling. Museum staff dressed as princesses and princes waiting to greet her. And at the center stood a towering 3-tier castle cake, with Mia's name written in shimmering pink frosting. Is all of this for me? Mia's voice trembled. All of it is yours, little princess. Lorenzo knelt beside her. Happy birthday. Mia didn't speak. She just stood there as tears rolled down her cheeks. Cassie rushed over, afraid something was wrong. But when Mia turned to her, Cassie saw these weren't tears of sadness. They were the tears of a child who had grown used to having nothing and was suddenly given the world. Mama, Mia whispered through sobs. I never thought I'd have a birthday like this. I thought I never would. Now you do. Cassie hugged her daughter, her own tears falling. And you'll have birthdays like this every year from now on. Every single year. Papa promises. The 3 triplet boys stood beside Lorenzo, watching with unusually serious expressions. Then Theo stepped forward and held out a small gift wrapped in scribbled paper. It's from us, he said softly. We made it ourselves. Inside was a bracelet made of colorful plastic beads, clearly handmade by the boys, uneven and imperfect. But to Mia, it was the most beautiful gift she had ever received. You made this for me, Mia asked, her voice still shaking. Because you're our sister, Nico replied. Sisters get birthday gifts from their brothers. Mia wrapped her arms around all 3 boys, and Cassie watched the 4 children clinging to each other with a heart overflowing with love. She looked up and met Lorenzo's gaze. He was looking at her, and in his dark eyes Cassie saw what she had tried to deny for weeks. Love, not gratitude, not respect, real love. And she knew that no matter how crazy this was, no matter how dangerous Lorenzo might be, she was in love with him. In love with the man who rented an entire museum for her daughter's birthday. In love with a father learning how to love his children one day at a time. In love with a mafia boss who hid a soft heart behind a cold exterior. She was already in love, and she couldn't stop anymore. The night after the birthday party, when all 4 children were fast asleep, worn out from a day of joy, Cassie stepped onto the terrace to breathe in the cool air. She stood there looking out over Manhattan glowing with lights when she heard familiar footsteps behind her. Lorenzo came to stand beside her, silent for a long moment before speaking. You made Mia happy today, not me. Cassie shook her head. You're the one who rented the entire museum, the one who did all of that for her. I only rented the museum. You're the one who taught her to believe in happiness." Lorenzo turned to her, and his gaze tonight was different from every time before. There was no coldness, no distance, only a tenderness Cassie had never seen in him. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice low and steady. "I've tried to hold this back, tried to convince myself it was just gratitude, just respect, but I can't lie to myself anymore." Cassie felt her heart begin to race. "Lorenzo, what are you saying?" "I'm in love with you," Lorenzo said, each word clear and unwavering. "I've loved you since the day you made pancakes with my sons and treated them like people instead of problems. I've loved you since the day you sat on the floor during their meltdown and waited until they calmed down. I've loved you since the moment you learned who I was and chose to stay instead of running away. I love you, Cassandra Morgan. I love you with everything I have." Cassie stood frozen, unable to believe what she was hearing. The most powerful man in New York, the Mafia boss the entire city feared, was standing in front of her confessing his love with a sincerity that made her want to cry. "This is complicated," she whispered. "You're my employer. There's a power imbalance. And the children, if we try and fail, they'll be hurt. I know all of that." Lorenzo stepped closer and lifted her chin, so she had to look into his eyes. "I also know I can't keep pretending I don't feel this. I watch you with the children every day, and I think about what it would be like if we were a real family. If you were my wife instead of my employee. If we could build a future together. And if I hurt you," Cassie asked, her voice trembling, "if I'm not good enough. I don't know how to love the right way, Lorenzo. The only man I ever loved destroyed me. I don't know how not to repeat that mistake." "You weren't the one who was wrong," Lorenzo said, his thumb brushing her cheek gently. "He was, and I'm not him. I won't promise to be perfect. I'm dangerous. I have enemies. I do things you may never fully accept. But there's one thing I can promise. I'll never hurt you. I'll protect you with my life. You and the children are my family, and I protect my family at any cost." Cassie didn't answer with words. She rose onto her toes and kissed him. The kiss carried everything she didn't know how to say: fear and hope, wounds from the past, and faith in the future. Love she had tried to hold back but couldn't anymore. Lorenzo returned the kiss, one hand at her waist, the other threading into her hair. The kiss was deep and sweet, as if they had been waiting for this their entire lives. When they pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard, foreheads resting together. "That took too long," Lorenzo murmured. "I was going to say perfect, but too long works too." Cassie laughed softly. Then a small voice came from the terrace doorway. "We knew it." They turned to see all 4 children standing there, eyes wide but faces lit up with grins. Leo spoke first. "Papa looks at Mama Cassie like a prince looks at a princess in movies." He crossed his arms triumphantly. "That means kissing, right? Are you okay with this?" Cassie asked, looking anxiously at the 4 small faces. "Does that mean we're a real family now?" Nico asked instead. "A real family. Forever," Lorenzo answered, "if you all agree." The 4 children looked at each other, then rushed forward together, wrapping Cassie and Lorenzo in a tangled embrace full of laughter and cheers. "A real family?" Theo whispered, smiling brighter than Cassie had ever seen him smile. "We have a real family now." 2 weeks after that first kiss on the terrace, Cassie's life felt like a fairy tale she was afraid to believe was real. Lorenzo and she didn't rush anything. They moved slowly, keeping the children at the center, building a foundation for something new. Stolen kisses in the kitchen when the kids weren't looking, hands finding each other beneath the dinner table, late-night conversations on the balcony when the whole house was asleep. Cassie had never been loved like this. Never been treated as someone who mattered, who was respected, who was protected, and she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved this happiness. Then the past came knocking. It was a Tuesday morning like any other. Cassie was in the kitchen making pancakes when the doorbell rang. Margaret went to answer it, and a few seconds later returned with a tense expression. "Miss Morgan, there's a man here to see you. He says he's Mia's father." Cassie's heart stopped. It couldn't be. Not now. Not when everything was finally good. She stepped into the hallway on trembling legs and froze when she saw the man at the door. Ryan. He looked far worse than the last time she'd seen him. Thinner, more worn down, eyes bloodshot, the sharp smell of alcohol clinging to his wrinkled clothes, but his smile was the same, that poisonous smile she'd feared for 4 years. "Cassie," he drawled, his gaze sliding over her before sweeping the luxury penthouse. "You look pretty good. Found yourself a rich boyfriend, huh?" "What do you want?" Cassie asked, forcing her voice to stay steady while her heart raced. So rude. Ryan stepped inside without invitation, and Cassie fought the instinct to retreat. I just want to see my daughter. It's been 2 years. A father misses his kid. You left, Cassie said through clenched teeth. You drained the account and disappeared without a word. You gave up being a father that day. I didn't sign anything, Ryan sneered. Legally, I'm still her father. I still have visitation rights, and I can fight for custody if I want. And I'm thinking, he glanced around the penthouse again. Maybe I should take my daughter back to live with her real dad instead of staying here with a criminal. Cassie's blood ran cold. What do you know? Enough, Ryan scoffed. Lorenzo Moretti, Don Moretti, the most powerful mafia boss in New York. What do you think a judge will say when he finds out you're raising a child in the home of a criminal? When he finds out you're sleeping with him while your daughter is in the next room? You have no right, Cassie said, her voice shaking with anger and fear. You abused me for 4 years. You think the court won't care about that? Where's the proof? Ryan stepped closer, and Cassie felt herself shrinking like she used to. Did you ever call the police? Ever go to the hospital and file a report? Nothing, right. Because you were too scared, too weak to do anything. Me, I've got lawyers, I've got a plan, and I can turn your life into hell if you don't cooperate. What do you really want? Cassie asked, exhausted. Money. Ryan stopped pretending. I want money. $300,000. You give me $300,000, and I'll disappear. I won't come back. I don't have $300,000, but your boyfriend does. Ryan stepped closer again, now only a few feet away. You think I'm stupid. I've been watching you. I know you live here. I know his kids call you mama. I know you're trying to build your perfect little family. I can destroy it all with one call to child services. You're not allowed near Mia, Cassie said, her voice hardening. I won't let you near her. You don't get to tell me what I can do. Ryan's eyes darkened, and Cassie recognized the rage rising in him, the rage she knew too well. You always thought you could talk back to me, didn't you? You forgot your place. He raised his hand, fingers curling into a fist. Cassie closed her eyes on instinct, her body bracing for the blow like it had hundreds of times before. She heard Mia's laughter somewhere in the penthouse, her daughter laughing with her brothers, and she thought that whatever happened to her, she wouldn't let Ryan anywhere near her child. But the blow never came. Instead, Cassie heard a sickening crack and a scream of pain from Ryan. She opened her eyes and saw Lorenzo standing in front of her, one hand gripping Ryan's wrist twisted back at an unnatural angle, his gaze ice cold as he stared at the man writhing in agony. Lorenzo didn't say a word. He simply stood there, gripping Ryan's wrist in a position that forced the man down onto his knees in agony. The blackness in Lorenzo's eyes was so cold, Cassie felt as if the temperature in the room had dropped several degrees. This wasn't the Lorenzo she knew, the man who told bedtime stories every night, the awkward father learning how to love his children. This was Don Moretti, the mafia boss the entire city of New York feared. Let me go. Ryan groaned, his face twisted in pain. Do you know who I am? I'll sue you. I'll call the police. Go ahead. Lorenzo finally spoke, his voice low and dangerous, like the growl of a predator. Let's see who gets here first. Your police, or my people. He twisted Ryan's wrist a fraction more and Ryan screamed. You walk into my home, threaten my woman, demand money from me, and you think you're entitled to anything. Cassie stood behind Lorenzo, her heart pounding, but not because she feared Ryan anymore. She was afraid of what Lorenzo might do. She knew he was capable of killing. She knew he had done it before, and looking into his eyes now, she knew he was standing dangerously close to that line. Lorenzo, she said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. The children are in the house. Lorenzo froze. The muscles beneath her hand were rigid. But when she mentioned the children, something in him softened, just slightly. He hauled Ryan to his feet and shoved him toward the office. In here, he ordered. We're going to talk like civilized men. Or at least one of us will. Inside the office, Lorenzo forced Ryan into a chair and stood in front of him, arms crossed. Cassie stood near the door, unsure whether she should stay or leave. Lorenzo motioned for her to remain. This is how this is going to work, Lorenzo began, his calm more frightening than anger. You will sign documents relinquishing all parental rights to Mia. No custody, no visitation, no contact. You will no longer exist in that child's life. In return, you'll receive $50,000 and the privilege of walking out of this building with all your limbs intact. $50,000, Ryan laughed shakily. I asked for $300,000. You demanded $300,000 from Cassie, Lorenzo replied coldly. You're negotiating with me now. And I don't negotiate. I set terms. You can accept them or you can refuse. And if I refuse, Ryan tried to sound defiant, but his voice trembled. Lorenzo smiled, and that smile was far more terrifying than rage. If you refuse, I'll make sure every terrible thing you've ever done is dragged into the light. I have people in every courtroom, every police precinct, every government office in this city. I'll pull up your records for driving under the influence, for assault, for unpaid debts. I'll make sure you can't find work scrubbing toilets, and that's only if I choose to stay within the law. Lorenzo stepped closer, leaning down until his eyes locked onto Ryan's. If I choose to step outside the law, you'll disappear. Not disappear like you did when you ran away. You'll vanish completely. No one will ever find you. No one will know where you went. You'll simply stop existing. Do you understand what I'm saying? Ryan went pale. He glanced at Cassie as if begging for help, but Cassie stood silent. She felt no pity, no guilt, only a strange sense of relief seeing the man who had tormented her for 4 years finally put in his place. All right, Ryan said at last, his voice shaking. I'll sign. Bring the papers. Lorenzo made a call, and 10 minutes later a sharply dressed man arrived carrying a thick folder. His lawyer had everything prepared, as if he'd known this day would come. Maybe he had. Maybe he'd been ready since the night Cassie told him about Ryan. Ryan signed every page with trembling hands. The relinquishment of parental rights, the no-contact agreement, the receipt for payment. When it was done, Lorenzo handed him a thick envelope. 50,000, cash. Now leave, and remember this. If you come near Cassie or Mia ever again, if you so much as think about contacting them, I'll find you. And next time, there will be no negotiation. Ryan stood, stuffed the envelope inside his jacket, and hurried for the door. Before disappearing, he turned back to Cassie one last time. You were always trash, he spat, trying to reclaim a shred of dignity. He'll get tired of you soon enough. Get out! Lorenzo roared, and Ryan fled through the door as if chased by demons. When the door shut, Cassie collapsed. Her knees buckled, and she would have fallen if Lorenzo hadn't caught her. He pulled her into his arms, one hand stroking her hair, his voice gentle again. It's over, he whispered. He's gone. He'll never come back. Cassie cried. She cried from relief, from freedom, from finally escaping the shadow that had haunted her for 6 years. She cried in Lorenzo's arms, and he simply held her, saying nothing more, just being there until she was ready. You paid him to leave, Cassie said eventually. You didn't have to do that. You said you don't like negotiating. With men like him, money is the only language they understand, Lorenzo replied. 50,000 is a small price for peace for you and Mia. I'd have paid 10 times that if I had to. You're free now, Cassie. Truly free. She looked up at him and saw not just protection in his dark eyes, but love. The love of a man willing to do anything to keep her safe. Thank you, she whispered. You don't need to thank me. Lorenzo kissed her forehead. You're my family, and I protect my family at any cost. 3 weeks after Ryan disappeared, Cassie thought life had finally become peaceful, but she was wrong. The new threat didn't come from her past. It came from Lorenzo's world. She began to sense that something was wrong when Lorenzo started coming home later, his face more strained, the calls in Italian and Russian growing more frequent and more heated. The number of guards in the building doubled. Margaret moved with a level of vigilance Cassie had never seen in her before, and Lorenzo, the man who was calm in every situation, began checking the locks several times each night. What's going on? Cassie asked one night when she found Lorenzo in his office at 2 a.m, staring at his laptop screen with eyes red from lack of sleep. Lorenzo was silent for a long moment before answering. Viktor Kozlov. The name sounded familiar. Cassie remembered it was the name the blood-soaked man had mentioned the day she discovered Lorenzo was Mafia, the Russian Mafia boss. He's your enemy. He wants to be, Lorenzo said, rubbing his forehead wearily. The Kozlov family has been trying to expand into my territory for years. I've always managed to block them. But recently Viktor changed tactics. Instead of attacking head-on, he started watching, gathering information, looking for weaknesses. Weaknesses? My family? Lorenzo looked up at her, and Cassie saw fear in those dark eyes. Not fear for himself, but fear for the people he loved. He knows about you, about Mia, about my sons. He knows their school schedules, knows you take them to the park on Saturday afternoons. He knows everything. Cassie felt her blood turn to ice. He's threatening the children. He's sending a message that he can reach anyone I love whenever he wants. Lorenzo stood and walked to her, taking her hands in his. "I'm handling this. I won't let anything happen to you or the children. But for now, everyone needs to be more careful. No going out without security. No crowded public places. No exceptions. We need to tell the children," Cassie said. "They're old enough to understand that they need to be careful, and they'll be more afraid if they sense something is wrong without anyone explaining it." Lorenzo agreed, and the next morning they sat down with the 4 children in the living room. The kids looked at the adults anxiously, sensing the seriousness in the air. "What's wrong, Papa?" Nico asked, instinctively taking Mia's hand as if to protect his sister. "Papa has some problems with work," Lorenzo explained carefully, choosing words the children could understand. "There are some people who don't like Papa, and they might try to bother our family, so we all need to be more careful for a while." "Are bad people going to come take us?" Leo asked, eyes wide. "No one is coming to take you," Cassie said quickly, reassuring him. "But you need to listen to the adults. Stay with the guards when you go out, and never go anywhere alone. Can you do that? We'll be careful," Nico said seriously. "We'll protect each other." "Right." Leo and Mia nodded. But Theo, the quietest of them, was watching Cassie with his usual thoughtful gaze. "Mama Cassie, why do you look tired?" he asked suddenly. "Are you sick?" Cassie froze. She had tried to hide it, waiting for the right moment to speak, but Theo was too perceptive. He had noticed the change in her, the morning nausea, the unusual fatigue, the way she rested her hand on her stomach without realizing it. Lorenzo looked at her with concern. "Are you sick?" "Why didn't you tell me?" Cassie took a deep breath. She had planned to wait until things settled down, but maybe there was no such thing as a perfect moment. Maybe the family needed good news in the middle of all this worry. "I'm not sick," she said slowly, looking at Lorenzo. "I'm pregnant." Lorenzo froze as if someone had struck him. His mouth opened and closed, no words coming out. In his entire life, this powerful Mafia boss had never been this shocked. "You're pregnant," he repeated, as if he needed to hear it again to believe it. "We're having a baby, almost 2 months," Cassie nodded. "I found out last week, but I wanted to wait for the right time to tell you. But maybe the family needs to know now." "We're having a baby," Leo shouted, breaking the silence. "A real baby. Our baby." "Yes," Cassie smiled through tears. "You're getting another sibling." Nico stood, his face serious like a grown man's. "I'll protect the baby," he declared. "I'm the oldest. I'll protect all my siblings." Leo jumped up and down with excitement. "I'll teach the baby how to climb. The baby will climb as good as me." Mia clapped her hands. "I want a sister. I'll have a sister to play dolls with." Theo quietly walked over to Cassie and gently placed his hand on her stomach. "Is the baby safe, Mama?" he asked softly. "Will the bad people hurt the baby?" "No one will hurt the baby." Lorenzo finally found his voice. He knelt beside Theo, one hand on his son's shoulder, the other resting over Cassie's hand on her stomach. "Papa will protect the baby. Protect Mama. Protect all of you. No one is allowed to touch Papa's family." He looked up at Cassie, and in those dark eyes she saw 1,000 emotions. Shock, joy, fear, determination, love. "I'll end things with Kozlov before the baby is born," Lorenzo said. And it wasn't a promise. It was an oath. "My child won't be born under the shadow of threats. This family will be safe. I swear it to you." The attack came on a Tuesday night, as if the universe wanted to remind Cassie that the most important moments of her life always happened on that day. She was reading a bedtime story to the 4 children, all of them crowded together on one large bed, when the alarm tore through the calm. This wasn't the usual soft chime that sounded when someone entered the elevator. This was the emergency alarm, sharp and relentless. The alarm, Lorenzo had explained, meant intrusion. "Children, follow Mama right now," Cassie said, her voice steady even as her heart pounded wildly. "Now." No questions. The 4 children obeyed instantly, the survival instincts Lorenzo had drilled into them over weeks kicking in. Nico grabbed Mia's hand. Leo took Theo's, and they ran after Cassie down the hallway toward the safe room Lorenzo had built specifically for moments like this. The room was hidden behind a false wall in the master bedroom, with a thick steel door, an independent ventilation system, and enough water and food to last a week. Lorenzo had hoped they would never need it, but he had prepared for the worst. Cassie pushed the false wall aside, revealing the steel door. She entered the code with trembling hands, and the door slid open with a soft hiss. "Inside! Now! Hurry!" she urged, pushing each child in. Nico went last, turning back to look at her with the worried but resolute eyes of an oldest brother trying to be strong for his siblings. "You'll be okay," Cassie told all 4 of them. Stay in here. Don't come out no matter what happens. Do you understand? Where's Papa? Mia asked, her voice shaking. Papa will come. Papa always comes. Cassie stepped into the safe room and sealed the door. She heard the automatic locks engage, steel meeting steel with a sound that was solid and final. In the dim light of the emergency lamp, she pulled all 4 children into her arms and waited. The gunshots came. 1, 2, 3. Mia screamed and buried her face against Cassie's chest. Leo and Theo clutched each other's hands, their faces pale. Only Nico didn't cry. He sat with his eyes squeezed shut, lips moving as if he were praying. Cassie held them tighter, one arm instinctively shielding her stomach, where a small life was growing, unaware of the chaos beyond the walls. She thought of Lorenzo, of the man she loved somewhere out there facing his enemies. She thought of the possibility that he could be hurt, that he might not come back, and she prayed, for the first time in years, praying that he would be safe. 2 more shots rang out, then silence. The silence was more terrifying than the gunfire, because it could mean anything. Lorenzo could have won. Lorenzo could have lost. The attackers could be searching for them at that very moment. Cassie didn't know how much time passed. It could have been minutes. It could have been hours. Time lost all meaning inside that sealed steel room. She only knew to keep holding the children, whispering reassurances she wasn't even sure were true. Papa will be fine. We'll be okay. This will pass. Then came the knock. 3 short knocks, 2 long ones, 1 short. The code Lorenzo had taught her. Cassie. Lorenzo's voice came through the thick steel. It's safe now. Open the door. She entered the code with shaking hands, and the door slid open. Lorenzo stood there, his shirt smeared with blood, but his eyes were bright and alive. He wasn't hurt, or at least not seriously. The blood wasn't his. Papa. All 4 children rushed into Lorenzo's arms at once, crying and clinging to him as if afraid he might disappear. Lorenzo dropped to his knees, wrapping them all up, kissing the top of each small head. I'm here. I'm fine. No one is hurt. Cassie stood in the doorway of the safe room, her legs barely able to hold her. What happened? 2 of Kozlov's men, Lorenzo said, his eyes still on her over the heads of the children clinging to him. They got past the lower-level security. They didn't get past me. They were dealt with. Dealt with. Cassie knew what that meant. She knew Lorenzo had just killed 2 men to protect his family, and she didn't feel the horror she thought she should. She felt gratitude. Gratitude that he was alive. Gratitude that the children were safe. Gratitude that the baby inside her was still protected. Lorenzo stood and walked to her, pulling her into his arms. He didn't speak, just held her tightly as if she were the most precious thing in the world. I almost lost everything, he whispered into her hair. I almost lost you. Lost the children. Lost the child not yet born. I couldn't survive that, but you didn't lose us, Cassie said, holding him back, feeling his heart pounding through his shirt. You saved us. You always save us. Kozlov has to end, Lorenzo said, his voice hard as steel. I'll finish this. Tonight. He looked into her eyes, and Cassie saw the ruthless resolve of Don Moretti. No one threatens his family and lives to tell the story. Lorenzo kept his word. 1 week after the attack, Viktor Kozlov and every trace of threat from the Russian Mafia family vanished completely. Cassie didn't ask for details. She didn't need to know, and didn't want to know. She only knew that one night Lorenzo came home with exhaustion in his eyes but relief in his posture and said just 2 words to her. It's done. From that moment on, Kozlov's shadow no longer haunted their family. Life slowly returned to normal, or at least to what counted as normal for a Mafia family. The children went back to school without a constant wall of bodyguards hovering over them. Cassie could take them to the park without the constant fear of being watched, and her belly began to grow, the baby developing strong and healthy like a promise of a brighter future. Then one Tuesday morning, like every truly important moment in her life, everything changed again. Cassie was making pancakes in the kitchen, 4 children sitting around the table waiting for breakfast, when Lorenzo walked in holding a small red velvet box. He didn't say a word. He walked straight to where she stood by the stove and dropped to one knee on the flour-dusted kitchen floor. Cassie almost dropped the pan. Lorenzo, what are you doing? What I should have done a long time ago. Lorenzo opened the velvet box, revealing a diamond ring that sparkled softly, simple yet elegant. I have a ring. I bought it the first week you came here because I knew. I knew the moment you made pancakes for my children and made them laugh for the first time in months, that you were the woman I wanted to spend my life with. I kept waiting for the perfect moment to propose, and then I realized there's no more perfect moment than this one. Here, in the kitchen where you turned this house into a home, with our 4 children watching, with you carrying our 5th child. This is my life. You are my life. Cassandra Morgan. Will you marry me? Cassie stood there with tears streaming down her face, pancake pan still in her hand, flour smudged across her apron. She looked at Lorenzo kneeling before her, the most powerful man in New York, staring up at her with hope and fear, like a boy terrified of rejection. She looked at the 4 children holding their breath, waiting, and she knew there was only one possible answer. Yes. The kitchen exploded in cheers. Lorenzo stood, slipped the ring onto her finger, and kissed her right there amid flour and the faint smell of pancakes burning on the stove. The wedding took place 2 weeks later on a clear Saturday morning in Central Park. Not the lavish ceremony people might expect from a Mafia boss. Just family, Margaret, Rosa, and a judge Lorenzo knew. Cassie wore a simple white dress that gently hid her 4-month pregnant belly. Mia served as flower girl in a soft pink dress, while the triplets wore tiny suits identical to their fathers, solemn like miniature gentlemen. Lorenzo cried when he saw Cassie walking toward him. The ruthless Mafia boss, the man feared by all of New York, stood there with tears running down his face as he watched the woman he loved in her wedding dress. Their vows were simple and sincere. I choose you. You choose me. We choose each other. Every day. Forever. After the ceremony, they completed another sacred act. The judge stayed to witness and sign the adoption papers. Lorenzo legally adopted Mia as his daughter. Cassie legally adopted Nico, Leo, and Theo as her sons. On paper, in the eyes of the law, they were now a complete family. Mia, do you want Papa Lorenzo to be your real father? The judge asked gently. Mia looked at Lorenzo with wide, serious eyes. He already is my real father. The papers are just so everyone else knows. And you boys, the judge turned to the triplets. Do you want Cassie to be your real mother? She's been our mama since the day she made her first pancakes, Nico replied. We were just waiting for the paperwork to catch up with the truth. The judge smiled and signed the documents. And just like that, Mia Morgan became Mia Moretti. Nico, Leo, and Theo gained a legal mother. Their family was officially complete in the eyes of the world. That night, after the children were asleep, Cassie stood in front of the mirror, staring at the wedding ring on her finger. She still couldn't believe how much her life had changed. 6 months ago, she'd been sleeping in a car with a sick child. No money for medicine, no future. Now she was the wife of Lorenzo Moretti, the mother of 4 incredible children, pregnant with a 5th, living in a luxury penthouse in Manhattan. Is this real? She asked Lorenzo when he came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her pregnant belly. Am I dreaming? If you're dreaming, then I'm dreaming with you, Lorenzo said softly, kissing her shoulder. And I never want to wake up. From the hallway came the sound of small footsteps. Mia appeared in the doorway, eyes half closed with sleep but still searching for her parents. Papa, I can't sleep. I want Papa to tell me a story. It was the first time Mia had called him Papa, without adding Lorenzo afterward. Just Papa. Simple and natural as breathing. Lorenzo looked at Cassie, his eyes shining, then bent to lift his daughter into his arms. All right, little princess. Papa will tell you a story. Cassie watched them go, her heart so full she thought it might burst. Family. She finally had a real family. 5 months after the wedding, at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, Cassie woke to a sharp pain tearing through her abdomen and a warm wetness spreading beneath her. She lay there for a second, trying to understand what was happening, and then it hit her. Her water had broken. The baby was coming. Lorenzo. She shook her husband's shoulder. Lorenzo, it's time. Lorenzo shot upright like a spring, eyes still heavy with sleep but instantly alert when the words registered. It's time. Now. The baby. The hospital. Who do I call? Where's the bag? Where's the car? Where are the keys? Cassie would have laughed if she wasn't in so much pain she could cry. The man who could face the Russian mafia without a tremor was now pacing the bedroom like a headless chicken because his wife was in labor. The bag's by the door, she said between contractions. Call Margaret to watch the kids. And calm down. You're making me more nervous. Lorenzo stopped, drew in a deep breath, and then became the calm, decisive Don Moretti she knew. He called Margaret, called the driver, helped Cassie get dressed, and supported her into the elevator. Everything moved fast and efficiently, exactly the way Lorenzo handled everything in life. On the way to the hospital, Cassie squeezed Lorenzo's hand through every contraction. He didn't complain, just let her crush his fingers. Sometimes he kissed her forehead, whispering that she was doing great, that he loved her, that everything would be fine. The hospital had been alerted in advance, and they were taken straight to the best delivery suite. Doctors and nurses were already waiting. Cassie felt grateful that Lorenzo's money was useful in moments like this. 6 hours. 6 hours of pain, sweat, tears, and screams Cassie didn't know she was capable of making. Lorenzo stayed with her the entire time, letting her squeeze his hand raw, letting her yell that she'd never let him touch her again, letting her sob and shake when the pain peaked. And then, at 9:17 in the morning, a cry rang out, the cry of new life, the cry of their daughter. "It's a girl," the doctor announced, placing the tiny baby on Cassie's chest, completely healthy. "Congratulations." Cassie looked down at the small wrinkled face crying against her skin, and she cried too. This was her child, hers and Lorenzo's, a small miracle born from their love. "She's beautiful," Lorenzo whispered, his voice breaking. He stood beside the bed, tears streaming freely down his face without shame. "She's perfect. Just like you." "Do you want to hold her?" Cassie asked. Lorenzo carefully held out his arms, and Cassie placed their daughter into them. The powerful Mafia boss cradled the newborn, like the most precious thing in the universe, hands that had killed trembling with fear of hurting her. "Hello, little princess," Lorenzo whispered to his daughter. "Papa's here. Papa's been waiting for you for a very long time. You've got big brothers who'll protect you, a big sister who'll play with you, and a mama who loves you more than her own life. You're the luckiest baby in the world, you know that." "What should we name her?" Cassie asked. They'd talked about names many times, but never settled on one. "Valentina," Lorenzo said, eyes never leaving their daughter. "Valentina, Eleanor Moretti. Valentina because she was born from love. Eleanor for Eleanor, the woman who taught you the pancake recipe that brought us together." Cassie's tears spilled again. Eleanor, the only foster mother who ever truly loved her. The woman who died before Mia was born, the woman Cassie still thought of every time she made pancakes. And now her name would live on in Cassie's daughter. "Perfect," she whispered. "It's the perfect name." 4 hours later, after Cassie had been moved to recovery and Valentina had been cleaned and swaddled, Margaret brought the 4 older children to the hospital. They burst into the room like a small storm, then froze when they saw the baby in Cassie's arms. "She's so small," Nico whispered, afraid to speak too loudly. "She's way smaller than I thought," Leo said, standing on tiptoe to see better. "Does the baby have a name?" Mia asked. "Valentina," Cassie answered. "Valentina Eleanor. That's such a pretty name." Mia stepped closer, eyes shining. "I have a baby sister. I was right, wasn't I? I said I wanted a sister." And Theo, the quietest one, just stood there staring at the baby with watery eyes. He didn't say anything, only reached out and gently touched Valentina's tiny hand. And like magic, Valentina wrapped her fingers around his and didn't let go. "She's holding my finger," Theo said in awe. "She knows I'm her brother already. She knows all of you are her brothers and sister," Cassie said softly. "She's heard your voices for months inside Mama's belly. She already loves you." The 4 children crowded around the bed, gazing at the baby with reverence and love. Lorenzo stood behind them, watching his family with pure happiness in his eyes. And Cassie, lying there with her newborn daughter in her arms, her 4 older children gathered close, and her loving husband standing guard, felt her heart finally complete. 6 months after Valentina was born, on a Tuesday morning like so many other Tuesdays, Cassie stood in the familiar kitchen making pancakes. But today wasn't like the first morning she walked into this penthouse. Today, she was no longer the desperate woman sleeping in a car with a sick child. She was Cassandra Moretti, Lorenzo's wife, the mother of 5 children, and the heart of a family she'd never dared to dream of. Around the dining table, 7 family members gathered together. Nico, now 5 years old, sat properly like a true eldest brother, helping Valentina hold her bottle. Leo never stopped telling jokes and making silly faces, sending the whole table into laughter. Theo was still quiet, but the smile on his face now appeared far more often than it did in the beginning. Mia, the responsible 7-year-old big sister, carefully cut pancakes into small pieces so Valentina could practice eating solids. And Valentina, the 6-month-old little princess, sat in her high chair with dark eyes just like her father's, giggling every time her siblings made faces. Lorenzo sat at the head of the table, coffee in hand, but his eyes never left his family. The once powerful Mafia boss now spent most of his time at home, eating breakfast with his children, reading them stories every night, learning how to become the father he'd never known how to be. That night, after all 5 children were asleep, Cassie and Lorenzo stood on the terrace overlooking the glowing lights of Manhattan. It had become their ritual, those quiet moments at the end of the day to connect and talk. "Did you ever think your life would look like this?" Lorenzo asked, his arm wrapped around his wife's waist. Never, Cassie answered honestly. 2 years ago, I thought happiness was a luxury meant for someone like me. I just hoped to survive each day, keep Mia safe, not get thrown out onto the street. I didn't dare dream about love, about family, about a life like this. And now I have everything I never dared to dream of. 5 incredible children, a husband who loves me with his whole heart, a warm home, a real family, and it all started with a plate of pancakes, with seeing 3 hungry children instead of 3 bad children. Lorenzo kissed her hair. You taught me that family isn't blood. Family is the people who choose to stay together every day, through storms and sunshine, through hardship and happiness. You turned my cold house into a home. You turned me from a mafia boss into a father who knows how to love. I owe you everything. We don't owe each other anything, Cassie said, turning to look at him. We built this life together. Every day we choose each other. Every day we choose this family. That's what matters most. They stood there in silence, looking at the city below, thinking about the journey behind them. From a broken car parked behind a supermarket to a luxury penthouse. From absolute loneliness to a family of 7. From fear to love. From surviving to truly living. Cassie realized that life doesn't always give us what we want, but sometimes it gives us what we need. She needed a job, and life gave her a family. She needed safety, and life gave her love. She needed a roof, and life gave her a home. It all began with the courage to step into a strange penthouse, with the patience to see through children in pain, with the unconditional love she learned from Eleanor and passed on to the next generation. Family isn't something we're born with. Family is something we build every day through small acts, through Tuesday morning pancakes, through hugs when someone is sad, through patience when someone makes a mistake, through unconditional love for the people we choose to call family. And sometimes, the greatest miracles begin with the simplest things, like a pancake recipe from a woman who's gone, like the patience of a desperate single mother, like the open heart of a lonely mafia boss. Cassie and Lorenzo's story reminds us that no one is destined to be alone. No one is destined to fail. Sometimes all we need is the courage to walk through that door, the patience to wait for the storm to pass, and enough love to see the real person behind the outer shell. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss more moving stories each day. Please like and share this video with the people you love to spread the message of love and family. We'd love to know how you felt about Cassie and Lorenzo's story. Have you ever faced hardship and found hope in an unexpected place? Do you believe family is a choice and not just blood? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every comment and truly value the heartfelt stories you share. Thank you for taking the time to watch this story until the end. We wish everyone watching good health, a joyful life, a happy family, and days filled with love and peace. Remember, no matter how hard life gets, there's always light at the end of the tunnel. Sometimes miracles come from the simplest things, like a warm breakfast or someone willing to listen. Goodbye for now, and we'll see you in the next video.